Hey, everybody. Steven, can you hear me before I do anything else?
Yes, I can hear you.
Perfect. Does it sound good? Does it sound clean?
Yes.
All right. I've been worried about that all day. Um, for everybody else's knowledge, I updated my streaming rig to something far superior than what I had before, but I could not quite figure out some of the sound things, and it was like this the entire time to make sure it was going to work. So that's good. That thing works. Of course, it is me, your good buddy Spider, and that right over there is Steven. And you will notice that someone is missing. Once again, Robert Solomon is shirking his duty, not here. Just kidding. He's doing a presentation in Pennsylvania today. I think it's Pennsylvania. No, it was in Columbus. It was here in Ohio in Columbus. I had to remember what I saw him post earlier. So he's doing that. So tonight, we're going to do something a little different and a little interesting. Um, I had a few different names for it, but I hesitate to even call it a debate because it's going to be one level below a debate. Um, on our show, frequently we've talked about subjective realities. We've talked about multiverse things. We've talked about simulation theory in particular, which is a particular point that Stephen really enjoys. And I thought we don't give Steven enough of the opportunity to really expand on some of the things that he likes on this show, and we make him do it on his little side show on Sundays. Not to demean that, it's not a side show, it's his own show. I'm already starting out bad. See, I'm already bad. I'm being insulting and I don't even know it. But so I figured, why don't we bring some of that to the main show in an interesting way? We're going to do point counterpoint where I'll have Steven talk a little bit about the subject. Then once he's done, I'll talk a little bit potentially against the subject. He'll expand on it. I'll expand on my rebuttal and back and forth, back and forth. I'm actually going to be a more hard line than I really am in real life because there's a lot of things that we agree on simulation theory. I like the quantum physics. I like a lot of that kind of stuff. I like the mental stuff about subjective reality. I love that kind of stuff. But
It
for the
explains all
purposes,
the science.
and that's the thing too, it is a difficult thing to rebut. And so I'm going to take a hardline approach against some of my own personal ideas to kind of put things into perspective. And we're doing this less as a way to debunk or prove the theory and more to help you people, the audience, think about it, get really into it, and maybe you'll decide one way or the other without us having to convince you. It's more just, hey, that sounds kind of cool. I want to know more about that. And I think that's a really important part of what we do on the show. There are some ground rules. We're going to keep our parts short to keep it moving back and forth. Like what I'll do is I'll say, hey, Steven, tell us about this part of it. You'll get me a short, however long, by physicist A, and you'll say evidence by physicist A says blah, 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 blah. Then I'll do a rebuttal. Then you'll say, well, furthering, physicist B says this, and I'll do the same thing. That way we don't give a mountain of information of every single thing that you know about it all in one go, and then have me have to like remember everything to try to rebut everything. We'll do it one at a time. And we're going to keep it friendly too.
Yeah.
We're not going to interrupt. So while Steven is talking, I got to shut up. I can't say a word, and vice versa. So we're going to keep it orderly. We're going to keep it civil. And I hope we get some good comments because I would love to hear what people think about it. YouTube is notorious for not showing whether people are actually watching or not. So I don't know if people are tuned in yet. But here we go. Before we get too far into it, we should probably explain what it is. And since Steven is the one who was on the point side, Steven, explain to us, as if none of us have any idea what it is, the basics behind simulation theory.
So essentially, simulation theory is the idea that what we call reality, what we're living in right now, is essentially a video game or a simulation of some sort. And when you say video game, people get confused, but sometimes and think it's meant for entertainment purposes. But sometimes simulations are meant for educational purposes, like and they say one of the most common things that people would simulate would be ancient versions of themselves, like we did with Age of Empires and Civilization and games like that. But this one is so highly advanced that this simulation takes charge of all of your senses, including like your taste, your touch, your sense, all of this, basically like a highly advanced VR system that you can't just take the helmet off.
So it's a little bit like, for people who are familiar with the franchise, sort of like Assassin's Creed, but instead of him knowing I'm going into this simulation to go into past whatever, you're there and you don't know.
Yeah. Like the Matrix.
Side note, I did not like the Matrix. Anybody out there watching, that's not me just being the hard line on this side. I thought it was a summer popcorn slop movie, and people hate me for it all the time. Like, are you kidding? This is the best movie ever. It means so much. And it added a new phrase into our everyday usage of plugged into the Matrix, which really annoys me. But that's outside of what we're talking about. That's just being a grumpy man who doesn't like fun things. So Stephen, considering the simulation theory as it is, what is the first block of evidence that you would, if you were trying to ease somebody into it without throwing a lot of the heavy stuff, we're going to go from easy to more difficult as this goes on, which is also going to be easy to more difficult for me to try to come up with something against it, which is the point. It's a good thought exercise. What is the initial evidence that you would say for simulation theory?
In my mind, it's actually tied between two different things. A, the math in our universe is just far too perfect. We're the perfect distance from the sun, so it doesn't blow us up, but we're also not too far away that we're cold. And like our galaxy, it has the perfect number of planets, the perfect distance between them. All the math is so perfect, and there's Fibonacci numbers and the golden ratio and everything, as small as pine cones to as large as the galaxy itself. And the other thing is the observer effect in quantum mechanics. When the thing goes through, when we pass the particle through the double slit experiment, we expect it to do one thing, but it does another thing. And long story short, it basically makes a decision depending on whether or not it is being observed, at which point, once it notices that it is being observed, it travels backwards in time, collapses the waveform probability, and makes a decision like time travel.
Now, on the first part of the point, on the mathematical perfection, the first thing that would come to mind for me would be, what about mutations? What about things that come out with born with cancers or born with missing parts or pieces and things? How does that fit in to that theory?
Well, have you ever played a Bethesda game? There's always the NPCs that are glitched. So they're just glitched NPCs.
Furthering that argument, if someone were to go through, and I'm going a little bit far with this, so I don't want to go too deep into it because this is heavy stuff for later. But if someone were to go to the trouble, I say someone as in absence of just a whatever force. If someone were to go to the trouble of creating a simulation that was so good, what would cause it to generate glitches and things? Why would it be allowed to do so?
Because it has to be able to generate glitches and things specifically so people can question it but not know for sure one way or the other, so it leads doubt, so that way some people will question it, but most people will just look the other way. And you can't even imagine the kind of processing power that it's taking to run the simulation. Many people say it's impossible, but then you look at how they do video games, and when they process a building, they don't process everything inside the building until you actually get inside of it. It's just like 2 kilobytes of a facade.
And that's the other part of the classic rebuttal. When I looked up a bunch of stuff with this, the classic rebuttal is that the vast amount of processing power it would take to maintain an entire simulated universe is outside the scope of what we can do. Now, allowing for the fact that we may not be the most technologically advanced race in the universe. I don't want to get too far into adding extraterrestrials into the debate because that is a whole other a whole other avenue. But we can't currently imagine being able to simulate an entire universe ourselves. And so the rebuttal is because of that, because we can't imagine that, then it's not possible. How do you answer that?
I've thought about this a lot, and I have a very simple explanation. They say that the average human brain can process unimaginable amounts of data. So what I'm suggesting is, whereas in a video game, you might use internal components like, say, for example, the game engine to cut down on the processing power required, it's very similar. And what we're doing is the humans, much like you hate to know about in the Matrix, where they use the humans as batteries, it's very similar, but they're using the human brains as processing stations to help ease down on the processing power required by the actual motherboard and the graphics card. And there's billions of us, so that's why they're able to do that.
Now, that opens up an interesting perspective, because if we're talking about it as a pure simulation, then that could be theoretically billions of simulated people, but not billions of actual physical people. Now, does that mean that there was a stock of people that they started with to create the farm, so to speak? Are we the latest in line of a series of simulations, or are we the test?
I think it's very similar to Fallout in this instance. In Fallout 3, they had the place called Tranquility Lane, and you got in the sleeper pod, and then you were essentially trapped in the simulation. And I think it's very similar to that. And basically, there are simulated entities within the simulation, of course, the NPCs, but there are also players. And then there's the rare instance that can occur very, very rarely, like 0.1% of the time, in 0.1% of the NPCs, this can happen, like the movie Free Guy with Ryan Reynolds, where the NPC actually gains consciousness and develops a personality of its own and awakens. So I think it's a mix.
Now, one thing, I have a few quotes that are basically like the boilerplate. This is the stuff that standard skeptic physicists are going to spit out before they just move on with their day and not try to engage with anything. So these are the easiest stuff to battle back and forth, from my opinion. A physicist, first I'm going to start off with a quote from Sabine Hossenfelder. Her qualifications are that she is a theoretical physicist, science communicator,
I like her.
And then after that, she's a YouTuber. She worked as an academic physicist for 2 decades. So anybody who wonders, oh, she's a YouTuber, first, she has a background in physics that she's been in for quite a while. And she's known for controversial criticism of modern physics research. So she sounds like she'd be a person who'd be into this, but she's not. She said that it is physically impossible to simulate the universe without producing measurable inconsistencies, which doesn't mean the glitches that we talked earlier. It meant ways that physicists would look and be like, that's not right. That's an issue. Let me measure this. Wow, this is a sign that we're in a simulation because of this or this or this, like cracks in the wall, so to speak. So what would be the argument to that?
Like quantum mechanics. They say quantum mechanics doesn't follow the rules of normal physics, and it breaks everything. And they say that with the gateway process, if you believe in that, from the CIA, and the idea of the simulated universe or the holographic universe, depending on how you want to word it, they basically, this is the CIA, the military, which spent, billions and billions of dollars on researching this with the top minds in the field. And they came to the conclusion that we're living in a holographic universe, and every single thing that we know, even our fingertips and everything, is literally just vibrational energy running at different frequencies, vibrating at a high enough speed that it feels physical. And even science says that even when I put my fingertips together like this, no matter how small it is, they are not touching. They're being repelled by a microscopic quantum field of electromagnetic force. So I think it's something along those lines.
Interesting. Another physicist by the name of Frank Wilczek has what he calls an empirical objection. And he says that the laws of the universe have hidden complexity, which we accept,
Yes.
which is not used for anything, his quote. And the laws are constrained by time and location. And all of this would be unnecessary in a simulation. If a simulation existed, then all these inconsistencies and all of this extra stuff that the universe is supposed to be doing that we don't know about wouldn't be there. What do you think about that?
I have two ideas. Either A, we simply don't understand it because the simulation is so complicated and advanced, or B, it might be a red herring to throw people off the actual trail, because if we are in a simulation and they're using the simulation for some purpose, such as trying to find a way to achieve, world peace, or, stop going to war with each other, and, stop using nuclear weapons, or any of the other many stories they have about all this, reasons why they may be running a simulation, then it's basically like, what's the point of the simulation? And they don't want people to find out about it, so they have to include red herrings and stuff like that to keep people distracted, so they'll be focused on the wrong thing and they'll never figure out the truth.
Now, one more argument from Brian Eggleston. He's argued that the future humans of our universe couldn't be the ones performing the simulation, since the simulation considers our universe to be the one being simulated. In other words, it's been argued that the probability that humans live in a simulated universe is not independent of the prior probability that is assigned to the existence of other universes, which is an interesting viewpoint. It means that being in the future, you can't be simulating yourselves or a version of yourselves depending on where you are in the multiverse. And that gets a little dodgy. I don't know if it's a little dense for me in there. But what do you think? Do you think he's got a point there?
So I'm like you, it is a little bit complicated, but I'm going to try to work my way through it. It almost sounds like he's saying that in terms of simulation theory, rather than it being a bunch of different simulations, he's kind of linking it to the multiverse theory almost. And he's saying that the reason he's saying that you can't have these different versions of yourself in a past simulation is because you're not actually doing simulations. You're actually opening portals into the multiverse, maybe.
Sounds kind of close. That one was a tricky one.
Yeah.
When you get into some of these statements from modern physicists, they get into some ways of speaking that are kind of, you have to be another physicist at their level to kind of get through it, and I'm not. I'm not a mathematical
person. Because full disclosure, I kind of got a book one time by this dude named Melvin Vopson, I think was his name, and I was so excited because it was about simulation theory, and I got about 3 pages into it, and it was like, okay, you got to do zx to the third power over. I was like, okay, I'm out. I could not understand it at all.
Now, another physicist, and this makes a lot more sense to me, Marcelo Glazier. I'm going to see if I can pull up his qualifications here. He's a Brazilian-American physicist and astronomer, and he's the Appleton Professor of Natural Philosophy and a Professor of Physics and Astronomy at Dartmouth College. So he's got credentials there. his argument is that, and this is assuming that those who run the simulation are people who are beyond us, potentially post-human is the term.
Yeah.
After the singularity, after all that stuff. And if any of you don't know what that means, that's an entirely different show. You'll have to look that up separately. I'm sorry for confusing you, but we're trying to stick on topic.
Ultimate
But
technology.
like Kardashev scale kind of stuff that Rob likes to talk about, basically, which I'm always kind of like, but he objects because he believes post-humans would have no reason to run simulated universes because they would already be so advanced and have collected enough knowledge about their past that they would have little interest or reason to make a simulation. They may have virtual reality museums. This is where his imagination is kind of going.
I believe
where
that.
they could go and experience the lives and tribulations of their ancestors. But a full-fledged, resource-consuming simulation of an entire universe sounds like a colossal waste of time. What do you think about that?
It's complicated, but it might be for entertainment or education, and maybe they need to teach their children, and they're using this as a very immersive way to teach people rather than sending kids to school for 12, 13 years. That maybe they send their people into the simulation to teach them all these life experiences, and then when we get to the end of our life, when we do what we quote unquote die, or whatever they want to call it, when our soul leaves our body, that 21 gram difference, it's scientific, whatever that 21 grams is, when that 21 grams leaves our body and it returns to the source, the Akashic records, the holographic source, whatever you want to call it, it goes somewhere. Something leaves the body and goes somewhere. So what if that 21 grams is the essence of the person playing the game and we are simply the avatar? Because even science states, and I don't know any other way around this, but science states that matter is neither created nor destroyed. So if we were in a simulation, the matter could come from outside the simulation, enter the simulation, use us as avatars, and then leave the simulation there at the end of our life. Therefore, matter is neither created nor destroyed. And what we call a soul is our true essence, and we are immortal spiritual beings.
Now, would that not be one of those inconsistencies or measurable inconsistencies brought up by one of the previous physicists? Wouldn't that be something that potentially we could see happening and then be able to say, hey, look, there's something going wrong here?
And that's where the NDEs come from, where they say to go towards the light, but that's the trap. The light is the rebirth cycle, and I believe that the light that many people talk about seeing at the end of their life is, I don't know how else to word this, but I'm going to try to be as family friendly as possible. I believe that light is the light that you see when you're being reborn, and the reason that newborn babies cry is because when they're born, is because they know that they're losing all their memories of their past life, and they have to start this simulation or game over from level 0 and go through all this all over again because they didn't learn their lesson or finish their mission or whatever before the end. And if they go towards the light, they're sucked into the next life or the next, simulation. But if they go away from the light, that's how you actually exit the simulation.
Now, another argument proposed by Robin Dale Hansen. He's actually an economist and an author. He's an associate professor of economics at George Mason University and a former research associate at the Future of Humanity Institute of Oxford University. And he's known for his work on idea futures. So that's an interesting series, an interesting field relating to what we're talking about. Now, what he argues, he gets into kind of some moral, ethical kind of things here, which are a good point. He argues that a self-interested occupant of a high-fidelity simulation should strive to be entertaining and praiseworthy in order to avoid being turned off or being shunted into a non-conscious, low-fidelity part of the simulation. He additionally speculates that someone who is aware that he might be in a simulation might care less about others and live more strictly for themselves. Your motivation to save for retirement or to help the poor in Ethiopia might be muted. This is his quote, by realizing that in your simulation, you will never retire and there is no Ethiopia. So part of his argument depends on a person discovering that they're within a simulation. So apart from the possibility or impossibility of that, what do you think about that?
I do believe it's a possibility, and I don't believe that man has ever played a video game in his entire life.
He
Because
may not. He's an economist.
I
so-
don't know. Personally, I know I'm just speaking from personal experience, but when I was younger, I used to play through games first as the good guy because I felt that was the canonical story. That was how it was supposed to go. And then if I had the choice, I would play through a second time as the evil dude just to get the full experience and see the story from both sides to understand the full scope of everything that was happening. But these days, I just can't even bring myself to be evil in video games anymore because I'm like, I understand that these are just, NPCs or simulated characters, but I still don't want to hurt them. I mean, that's literally, according to psychology, harming video game characters intentionally without any, mission relation is a sign of psychopathy.
Now, to kind of expand on the argument that he has there a little bit,
it's just about having morals.
And that's the thing, too. If you get into a simulation, you would assume that nearly every aspect of the simulation is going to be programmed. So, assuming everyone is programmed to fit within the simulation and not do things that would jeopardize the simulation, wouldn't it be likely there would be a lot less people doing crimes, basically, because that kind of goes against the simulation? It's harming other people in the simulation, or even harming the simulation itself by causing damage to locations or to rainforests or to whatever.
My thing is exactly that. If there was no crime, no pain, no misery, it wouldn't be believable. We need the crime and the glitches and the Mandela effect and all this other stuff. We need all the craziness and the chaos to make it believable. And I believe the Mandela effect is also evidence of simulation theory because it's the stuff that gets left behind when they do updates and patches. It's the NPCs that remember.
Now, continuing even further, because this is where we're getting into the gritty stuff. Getting back to the programming, if the program was capable of all of that, wouldn't it also be capable of everything being believable and being perfect at the same time? Like, wouldn't it be, if we were a simulation, then the program could theoretically override any extra thoughts that we might have?
But that's the thing, is even the NPCs have a frequency, a vibration, and they have a small amount of consciousness, which, like Free Guy, has the ability to expand. But most NPCs are too focused on small things that don't increase their knowledge. Most NPCs are focused on sports ball, celebrity drama, gossip, how's the weather, and that's why the normal NPCs don't awaken or gain consciousness, because they're too focused on the small things and they don't question their life enough. They don't ask enough questions about what reality actually is. So therefore, they don't do the right research. They don't even try, and they never awaken to anything higher than, what am I going to have for dinner tomorrow?
Now, to further that even more, that brings us to another branching question. Assuming that it is programming, that the implication that we can go outside of that programming would also imply that rather than just being programmed parts of a simulation, it would mean that anyone who's an active thinker of any kind would also be a form of AI. Now, we know with our own current work with AI that AI frequently can go off in some bizarre directions and do really stupid things or dangerous things, depending, because they're gathering their data from imperfect people. They're gathering it from Reddit and from YouTube and from all across the internet. And we know that more people who are not interested in serious things use the internet for silly things or for crazy things than the people who do otherwise. So, that being said, if we were then AI rather than programs, wouldn't it be a higher probability that things would be far more chaotic even than they are right now? Like, things right now are kind of all over the place. We know that. We watch the news, but without getting into any real world stuff, just as for comparison, a multitude of AI who are not really constrained by any sort of moral or ethic programming anymore, I think we would have seen probably the end of the world long before now. But that's a personal opinion. But what do you think about that?
Two things. A, the physicists have actually found on the molecular level self-correcting code in like molecules, atoms, electrons, stuff like that. And on the other hand, I mean, if you were running a simulation, wouldn't you keep an eye on it and do updates and patches and, intervene when you needed to? And if things were getting too chaotic, you would pause the entire simulation, go in, fix all the bugs and glitches that you could find before restarting the simulation. And time, as we know it, is just a figment of our imagination anyways.
Now, that brings another question. That brings into how attentive whoever is running the simulation. That's again assuming that someone is running the simulation.
And didn't just leave.
What if the simulation came into existence somehow, either by being built by someone or as a natural part of the universe? But then at that point, what if no one is watching it? What happens then?
Then it ceases to exist because of the very observer effect that we experience. Because even our physics and all of our scientific laws, even if made up and fictional, are based in some form of reality outside of what we consider to be our reality. Because even if there is a greater reality, they don't just make stuff up. Even like us, even stuff that we quote unquote make up is based in some small kernel of truth.
Interesting stuff. Now, this is a short show because it was just kind of pulled out of thin air. I think it's gone well, though. I think we've given the people a lot to think about. This is kind of the moment with the epic rap battles of history where they say, "Who won?" And you put it in the comments. But it's not that serious because it wasn't. Like I said, I didn't want it to be an argument.
Yeah.
I wanted it to be a good back and forth discussion, and I think we've had that. Closing thoughts, Stephen. What do you, without rehashing what we've gone over, what more do you think can be said about the theory, and what should people look into if they're interested in studying it themselves?
I think the biggest interesting part about it to me right now off the top of my head is it explains almost everything about our science. To me personally, I feel like it explains almost every unanswered question about our science. The observer effect, how would that make any sense? It would make sense if this was a simulation or a video game, because the objects are not being rendered until they are observed, at which point they are rendered. And our consciousness directly interacts with that, I believe. And that wouldn't happen unless it was a simulation. That would happen in reality. And the biggest part of all is I would recommend people look up a compilation on this page called the Y Files on YouTube. They have like a 3-hour compilation, Is Our Reality an Illusion? And they talk about the holographic universe, simulation theory, and they talk in great detail about all the different scientific things that relate to this. And not just scientific, but also spiritual and religious. And he said something that I would like to repeat here is science and religion, everyone argues and acts like they can't go together. But at the end of the day, if this is a simulation, then God would just be the developer of the simulation. And, religion and science can go hand in hand, because the computer science part could go with the religion part, because Gnostics and other people actually do believe in, a false reality. They don't call it a simulation, but they do call it a false reality. And he goes into the science and the religion behind it. But my personal statement that I wanted to make is, in closing of my rant, I will end it by saying the Big Bang could be described as someone pushing the power button or booting up the program to start the simulation.
Good words to end on. Before we go off, I'm going to recommend some things that people can entertain themselves with if they're looking for more entertainment, but also things to think about. Of course, we mentioned The Matrix, and while I am not a fan, I know many other people are, and it is, it's a topical entry into the overall theories of everything. So by all means, some other good things are The Truman Show, which is not specifically a simulation, but it is a very similar concept. It's a person raised completely in a false environment.
And it's free on YouTube right now.
It's one of my favorite movies. I love it. It's one of Jim Carrey's least funny movies. He does some comedy in it because it's Jim Carrey, but it's a very, not necessarily serious, dark movie, but it does have a lot of thought to it. It's a very thoughtful movie. So The Truman Show
makes you think a lot about our reality.
Going back in time for some campiness, there's Overdrawn at the Memory Bank, an old Raul Julia film from the 80s that was riffed on Mystery Science Theater. It's a little ridiculous, but the concept is he has his mind put into a computer simulation of a variety of situations. He's a chimpanzee at some point, he's an anteater at some point, and then he's himself, and then he's in Casablanca and a bunch of other things, and he has a whole adventure. So if you're looking for some cheesiness, but still kind of related, and of course we mentioned Assassin's Creed is an interesting idea on the concept. Plus it has the earlier games. I don't know how well the later games came up with it, but the earlier games had some very nice historical accuracy. It was one of the things they prided themselves on. So if you start out on the early games in the series, it's definitely worth a watch. Anything else to throw in, Steven?
More of the multiverse, but still a good watch for any anime fans out there, is Steins Gate. That one really makes me think about simulation theory a lot because of the time travel and multiverse aspects.
All right. I want to thank Steven, of course, for indulging me in my little point counterpoint experiment. I'd like to do more of these in the future. I think we should have some with Rob here, maybe with one of us be a moderator, kind of how we do things already, but do like a back and forth with one person doing, okay, you.
We'll have to get Foot Locker outfits.
Maybe. I don't think the stripes would look good on me. But anyway, that's it. That's it for tonight. Next week, we are going to be back with our regular program. I believe this was going to be my episode anyway, but next week is going to be the official episode. We're going to be talking about the Fermi paradox and why we don't see alien life when it should be there. And we're going to get into some good discussion just like this week. Thanks, everybody, for watching. I appreciate it, and we are out.